Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here are the stories we're watching tonight. People along the Mississippi River are doing everything they can to stay safe from the floods, and a lot of them without heat.
We actually delivered a couple of heaters to our 91-year-old neighbor the other day because that's the only option you have right now to stay warm.
The missiles raining down on Ukraine, including the first strike on the capital of Kyiv in 51 days.
I think that I'm always in some constant internal fear of my life.
One of the surviving Idaho roommates just agreed to an interview with the murder suspect's lawyers.
Subpoenaing this witness gave the defense leverage to get what they probably really wanted.
Also, 3 soldiers are dead after Apache helicopters crash midair in Alaska, and people all over the world are desperately trying to get deep fake pornography wiped from the internet.
Let's send a clear message that we think the weaponization of this technology, primarily against women, is not okay.
And tonight, the Mississippi River is getting bigger by the minute, swelling with massive amounts of snowmelt. Here's Pleasant Harbor, Iowa. People there are no strangers to flooding, but this time the gas company has had to cut service, so a lot of people are without heat. People are literally taking space heaters to each other by boat.
The only alternatives are space heaters. We actually delivered a couple of heaters to our 91-year-old neighbor the other day because that's the only option you have right now to stay warm.
Now, the river has crested in parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin, but for communities downstream, the water could rise as fast as 6 inches a day until Monday. And joining us now from Davenport, Iowa, is NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch. Jesse, how much more is the river expected to rise there?
Yeah, Gadi, we are far from seeing the end of things developing here in Davenport. You can see behind me along the riverfront, we've already got water pouring over onto the streets, the Mississippi River behind it, and beyond that, Illinois. But over here in Iowa, we're expecting the water level to keep rising here until sometime in the middle of Monday. So we still have days of the water level continuing to go up here before the flooding crests here in Davenport. And obviously, this has been a slow-moving disaster, Gadi, that has made its way down the Mississippi River, and it's something we've been watching all week, and we're watching it unfold in real time. The water level has been fluctuating here throughout the day, but again, I can't underscore enough, what you're looking at right now is really just the beginning in this community.
And how are people preparing for the weekend?
Yeah, so there are some people who seem to be treating this somewhat as business as usual. There have been people who've come just to take a look at the flooding and take some photos, it appears. And largely, people are not seeming to be fazed by this. It's something that's fairly common to see flooding here along the Mississippi. But there are also some people who have been filling sandbags and bracing for water to hit their storefronts. We spoke with some people in the community, one person who is visiting, who used to live here in nearby, and someone who owns a business. Here's part of what they shared with us.
Does something need to change here?
It depends on the city. You know, do you want to deal with this or do you want a wall? You know, it's up to them, you know. Taxpayers may not want to pay for a wall. You never know.
Davenport does a very good job of managing the floods. We have 9 miles of riverfront they would have to basically hide or build a berm or a wall.
And so you can hear right there that business owner talking, Gadi, about this massive stretch of riverfront property that they have here in this community. And the mayor told me earlier that it would really just not make sense from a cost perspective to try to build what we think of as a traditional flood wall above ground and visible to try to prevent the water. So they look at the cost of that versus the cost of cleaning up after a flood. And he said it just doesn't make sense to try to build something like that. But the mayor also did say they are working on some other mitigation methods, including raising some roadways. So that is something that we'll see down the road here. But there's also a beauty factor. Some people we've heard from speak about the fact that they like to come down here and be able to look out at the waterfront view. And so that's another thing that factored in here. But bottom line is what we're looking at right now is not something that has surprised people we've talked with. And it's not something that they necessarily, feel outraged about, that it needs to change. It's just part of life out here, is how it's been described by some.
So now it's just a matter of waiting for the water to go down.
Well, first it's going to go up more, and then hopefully it'll go down without causing too much damage.
Yeah. NBC's Jesse Kirsch. Thanks so much, brother. And now to that deadly helicopter crash in Alaska. 3 soldiers are dead and 1 hurt after 2 Army helicopters crashed midair last night over Alaska. The 2 Apache gunships went down while coming back from a training flight. The Army is investigating, but this is the latest in a string of deadly helicopter crashes. The last one in Kentucky, where 9 soldiers were killed. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cubey joins me now. Courtney, it sounds like this happened as they were coming back in. Do we know what went wrong?
That's right. We don't. And what we do know is that it occurred during daytime. There are no reports of any adverse weather or limitations in their visibility. So the Army is now looking at what could have happened that caused these 2 helicopters to crash midair like this. And not only was there the crash that you mentioned last month that killed the 9 U.S. soldiers, there was also one even before that in February that killed 2 Tennessee National Guardsmen. Again, and that was also a Black Hawk helicopter. Now, what we're learning late this evening, Gadi, is that because of the string of crashes, tonight, the Chief of Staff of the Army has ordered an aviation stand down. What that means is that no U.S. Army helicopters can fly anywhere in the world temporarily until all U.S. Army pilots receive some new training. Now, what this indicates is that it doesn't seem to be a concern about the platforms or the types of helicopters. As I said, we had the Black Hawk helicopters in the 2 recent crashes, but yesterday's were Apaches. It doesn't seem to be the platform. It seems that the Army is looking to ensure that the training is sufficient to ensure that their pilots aren't making any kind of mistakes, so they can be as ready as they possibly can be, even when it comes to a routine training mission, Gadi.
Now, Courtney, is the Army still treating these as isolated incidents, the other crashes and the one we just saw, or is there something else, something bigger at play here?
They're not really sure. In short, you know, as you mentioned, there's some Army investigators are coming from Alabama. They're on their way to Alaska right now to try to figure out what happened here. But, you know, as I said, there's 2 different platforms here. So we have the Blackhawks and the Apaches. There was different weather at the time. In the case of the 9 soldiers who were killed near Fort Campbell last month, it was a nighttime mission. Yesterday in Alaska was a daytime mission. So there are a lot of factors that were completely different in these 3 crashes. But again, the fact that they were all Army aviation assets and they were Army pilots. That's why the Army is looking to make sure and taking the action, this pretty major move of a complete stand down of all their aviation assets, temporarily anyway. They're making that move to ensure that there's not some problem here that they need to dig out.
Courtney, thanks so much. In El Paso, hundreds of migrants are setting up camp once again after crossing into the United States. All of this is happening ahead of the lifting of Title 42 that is now weeks away. Now, a quick reminder, Title 42 is that pandemic-era policy that allowed the U.S. to quickly turn migrants back because of COVID concerns. Now, the last time El Paso saw this, it was back in December, and thousands of migrants were dealing with freezing temperatures. But now temperatures are up. The people who are crossing more frequently, and those numbers are expected to grow.
At the moment, the people at the shelter let us stay here. And as you can see, we're sleeping on cardboard and on mattresses that don't work.
Oh, in southern Mexico, a caravan of thousands of migrants is headed north, while the United States announced that they will be opening migrant processing centers in other countries to try to reduce a border surge. But some members of the caravan say they are committed to making it across the border.
Los que venimos para Estados Unidos no nos van a poder detener por mucho que pongan puntos migratorios. Hay tanto lugar por donde cruzar, no nos van a detener.
And joining us now is NBC News correspondent Gadi Venegas. Gadi, so now the United States wants to open processing centers, not just here in the United States, but also in Central and South America for migrants. The first 2 are going to open in Guatemala and Colombia. How are those going to work?
Gadi, we first heard about these yesterday. We're still waiting to hear from more information from the White House about how they're going to work. But what we know is that Guatemala and Colombia are key locations geographically because most migrants who come from South America through land have to cross to Colombia. And there's a stretch of land between Colombia and Panama where migrants will cross the jungle. The intention would be to have a migrant center there, which is where the traffic goes through. And then again, there's another point between Guatemala and Mexico where migrants cross from Central America into Mexico. So it makes sense to choose these two countries as specific locations for these migrant centers. Now, the U.S. government is going to inform us on the details of how they will operate. We know that organizations are going to work with U.S. officials on these centers, these migrant centers, where the migrants will be able to apply for refugee status. We do know that now they're going to be able to apply for refugee status in Canada, in the U.S., and also in Spain. So these are some of the changes that will come as they open these migrant centers, Gadi.
And with the expiration of Title 42 just around the corner, what other changes do you think we can see along the border?
Right. So the main change is going to be now that anyone anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, according to the U.S. government, will be able to apply through these migrant centers to come to the U.S. Now, when you look at refugees, that's a separate category from asylum seekers, which a lot of the individuals that come to the U.S.-Mexico border will seek asylum. Refugee status is different. Usually an individual will seek refugee status when they're in another country. Now, the U.S. has agreed to give 20,000 more slots to people that want to seek this refugee status in the next 2 fiscal years. And then now we have Spain, as I mentioned, and Canada also offering to take some of these migrants so they can choose which country they want to try to migrate to, giving them more opportunities to go the legal route. Now, additionally, the U.S. has also announced that they will be opening a family reunification program once Title 42 is lifted for people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Colombia, offering background checks. So that's something that could help with a lot of the family separation issues. But also, it's going to be much more difficult for migrants who arrive in the U.S. Now, immigration agents at the border will continue to enforce the laws as they have been. But now, if a person enters the U.S. illegally twice, immigration agents will be able to process a 5-year ban for those individuals moving forward if they want to apply for any process to try to enter the U.S. Gadi?
And what's the response been from people that may be already on the way to the United States?
So, Gadi, we always have misinformation that makes its ways to the migrants. And usually what officials have told me at the border, Mexican officials, is that smugglers will spread a lot of misinformation and spin it in a way that convinces migrants to go to the border, regardless of what's happening when it comes to immigration policy. Right now, we've seen hundreds crossing every day through the Texas border. A lot of them have made their way to Matamoros, Tamaulipas, south of the Texas border. In fact, thousands were camping out because they understand that once Title 42 is lifted, it will be much more difficult for them to cross into the U.S., which is technically correct. But what we've seen happen, Gadi, is that even when the policies change, there's some type of information that will usually come to the migrants and convince them that there's always a way to get into the U.S. And many of them have also said, regardless of the policy, that they don't understand. They're coming to the U.S.-Mexico border because they say they have no other alternative, Gadi.
Gadi Venegas, thanks so much. And lawyers for the man charged with murdering 4 college students in Idaho are asking for testimony from one of the surviving roommates. Brian Koberger's legal defense team thinks Bethany Funk might have information that could clear his name. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has more.
2 roommates survived the stabbing attack inside this house last November that left 4 other students dead. Bethany Funk was one of the survivors, and now she's agreeing to be interviewed by the defense in the murder case. Attorneys for the suspect, Brian Koberger, issuing a subpoena for Funk to testify. Koberger's legal team claiming Funk has exculpatory information that might help to exonerate him. An investigator for the defense writing, Ms. Funk's information is unique to her experiences and cannot be provided by another witness. Funk's attorney fought back, filing a motion to quash the subpoena, writing, even if Funk possesses exculpatory evidence, which remains unknown, there is no place or reason to present it at a preliminary hearing. But new court documents made public show she's now agreed to an interview with the Idaho-based defense counsel. Funk will testify in Reno, Nevada, where she's from, instead of taking the stand in the Layton County, Idaho court, where Koberger's preliminary hearing is set to begin in late June. Ahead of the hearing, the prosecution expanding its team as they look to bolster their case against Koberger. 2 deputies from the Idaho Attorney General's office, Jeff Nye and Ingrid Bate, have been appointed to assist in the prosecution.
Brian, did you do
Koberger was arrested in late December, charged with the stabbing murders of Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Maddie Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. According to charging documents, their other surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, saw a male figure with bushy eyebrows, a mask, and black clothing in the home that night. Funk's account of that night is not included in those documents. Prosecutors allege DNA evidence, video surveillance, and cell phone records led them to Koberger, who is pursuing a PhD at nearby Washington State University. He has yet to enter a plea, but has said through a former attorney he believes he'll be exonerated.
Aaron McLaughlin, thanks so much. And still ahead this hour, Russia unleashes a deadly attack on Ukraine aimed directly at civilians. And the governor of Florida looks to find presidential footing in London, or so it appears, where just about everyone's attention is on the upcoming coronation of King Charles III. We're going to tell you about the ancient stone being brought out for the occasion. Stay tuned. And around the world in 80 seconds today starts in Taiwan, where officials there claim a Chinese combat drone flew around the island. This is one of dozens of military aircrafts and warships that have tested Taiwan's defenses in the last 24 hours. And China claims Taiwan is part of its territory. Taiwan rejects that notion and says it rules itself. Pope Francis didn't mince words in a speech to the leaders of Hungary today. In his second visit to the country in less than 2 years, the Pope warned of the dangers of rising nationalism and urged the government to be more welcoming of migrants. Hungary's prime minister is on the opposite side of perhaps just about every issue the Pope stands for. And the U.S. is ramping up efforts to get Americans out of Sudan. About 300 Americans were bussed out of the capital today, but because of the chaotic nature of things, evacuations are extremely sketchy. Turkey reported that an evacuation plane of theirs was shot at today. Again, this is all taking place under a ceasefire agreement that is shaky at best, but it was extended today by another 72 hours. And Ukrainians today woke up to air raid sirens for the first time in months. Now, that was the capital of Kyiv as it was being targeted by Russian missiles. Officials say at least 22 people, including 3 children, were killed in the attack. But it wasn't just there. Other cities were bombarded as well, including the central Ukrainian city of Uman. Rescue teams there are still searching for survivors tonight after missiles struck an apartment high-rise. NBC's Ellison Barber is in Kyiv. Ellison, I know you were in Uman a little bit earlier today. What did you see?
Yeah, we watched for hours as rescuers painstakingly combed through what is left of that apartment building. This was a residential apartment building. You could see in the rubble wallpaper, it looked like it was some sort of lavender floral print, not at all something that you would expect to see anywhere other than in people's homes. The death toll, it just continued to climb throughout the day. This morning, search and rescue team said they did recover, saved 17 people from the rubble, but then we found out how many had died and how many of those were children. The numbers just expected to rise again throughout the night, in part, Gadi, because search efforts are still ongoing right now, and we're hearing reports that perhaps there are still some children that have been unaccounted for, and that's part of why these rescue efforts are going so late into the night. They brought out generators as the sun was setting so that they could keep searching, and in sort of the shadow, if you will, of the building, we saw what was the beginning of a makeshift memorial for the people who had died in this building. We spoke to a number of people on the ground. We watched as people cried, waiting, hoping for news of their loved ones. We heard one woman who came over to another woman as we were waiting inside this area where people who had survived could go for help. And she, in tears, just said, "I lost my grandchild." Another person we spoke to, she had fled from a number of different cities. This is not her home. She is what would be considered an internally displaced person. I asked her, is anywhere in Ukraine safe? This is what she told us. Is anywhere in Ukraine safe?
Nowhere. I moved a lot since the war started. I moved a lot. I've been in Irpin, where my husband's parents live. I've been in Kyiv, I've been in Odessa, and now I moved to Uman, and nowhere is safe.
Gadi, this is a fairly small city. Less than 100,000 people live here. That at least was the pre-war population. But it's a city most people in Ukraine know, in part because it's a really important site for Jewish people. Tens of thousands of Hasidic Jews make a pilgrimage to the city of Uman every year during Rosh Hashanah. Russia has claimed that one of the reasons they started this full-scale invasion, this war, what they falsely describe as a military operation, in part to quote-unquote denazify Ukraine. Yet what we saw in the last 24 hours was a airstrike on a civilian area in a city that is one of the most important Jewish cultural sites in this country. Gadi?
Heartbreaking. And so this clearly residential building that was hit hundreds of miles away from the front lines of the war, we just saw that map. Was this targeted? What's Russia saying here?
Russia's Ministry of Defense is saying that they launched a series of high-precision missile strikes on Ukraine, and that all of them were focusing on trying to hit military-related targets. They said they were targeting deployment points for reserve units of the armed forces of Ukraine. We asked almost everyone that we could get to talk to us, often off camera, because they were just going through so much in that moment. Is there any sort of military installation here? The answer we kept hearing again was no. We watched the people coming in and out of the building. We watched the people who were searching for people missing, who were crying for those who have died. None of them were members of the military. It was all civilians. And the buildings around this apartment building, Gadi, just more apartment buildings. These were people's homes. Gadi?
And your description of the floral wallpaper inside. Ellison Barber, thanks so much. And 1 week from tomorrow is the coronation of King Charles III, and preparations are underway, including the return of something called the Stone of Destiny. NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea is in London with more.
A new monarch, a different flag. Charles III presented the king's colors to his troops Thursday in the gardens of Buckingham Palace.
It is the greatest possible privilege to be able to present a new strain of the colors.
Charles and Queen Consort Camilla honoring the troops, while behind the scenes, crews are carefully stitching together uniforms for the big day with the king's new insignia. In the skies, a practice session for what will be Britain's biggest military ceremonial operation in 70 years.
1,100 feet, 1019.
60 planes, 6,000 troops. With 1 week to go to the coronation, preparations are underway and excitement is growing.
London is like no other place. This is like the New York, the LA, and the San Francisco all combined.
Really cool to see this happening. And the tradition and the customs and the ceremonies, it's spectacular. We don't have anything like this at home.
Witnessing history, the famous Westminster Abbey at the center of a centuries-old ceremony that will crown a king and queen. The palace announcing new roles for members of the public this morning. An accountant turned farmer will carry the king's standard. An author and former children's TV host holding the scepter, representing the monarch's spiritual role. As the next generation gets ready, Prince William, expected to be his father's only liege man at the coronation, will kneel and pledge his allegiance. The Prince and Princess of Wales shown the ropes Thursday, rappelling over a cliff with the mountain rescue team in Wales. The couple, all smiles, picking up pizza after their Welsh adventure. And this morning, another ancient tradition, the Stone of Destiny, used in coronations for centuries, leaving Scotland and heading south. Kelly Kobiea, NBC News.
And coming up, the Federal Reserve takes some of the blame for the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in a new report, but something else they blamed? Social media. We're going to explain. Then you got to see this. Superheroes come in all shapes and sizes, including in the form of a 7th grader right there. Incredible video shows the moment where Dylan, a quick-thinking middle schooler in Michigan, saved the day after his bus driver passed out behind the wheel. He saw the driver starting to lose consciousness. He quickly sprang into action, bringing the bus to a complete stop. The bus driver is still in the hospital, but in stable condition, and Dylan is being honored as a hero. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. More than 20 people are dead in Ukraine after Russia fired missiles during a nighttime attack that hit at least one apartment building. Kyiv was hit for the first time in more than a month. And 3 soldiers were killed after 2 Apache helicopters crashed midair in Alaska. And tonight, the U.S. Army ordered a 24-hour aviation pause to review safety procedures. And we are on flood watch. Sandbags are lined up along the Mississippi River. Some areas are expected to crest tomorrow and early next week. And let's go now to Idaho, where the 3rd week of testimony just wrapped up in the murder trial of Lori Vallow. That's the mom who is facing charges for the deaths of her 2 children and the ex-wife of her husband, Chad Daybell. Now, Tammy Daybell was the focus of today's testimony, with her sister taking the stand again this morning. The jury also heard the 911 call made when Tammy died, as well as autopsy findings that ruled her death a homicide. But one of the biggest moments in court this week was the cause of death for J.J. Vallow, which was revealed to the public for the first time. Investigators say the 7-year-old boy was suffocated by a plastic bag and duct tape. Abby Davis from our Boise station has more.
Nearly 3 years ago, law enforcement found 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan's remains. But many of the details about how they died and what their remains looked like were unknown until this week.
The state is continuing with presenting evidence in its case.
During day 17 of their mom, Lori Vallow's murder trial, experts shared more brutal details about the kids' murders. Many of those details involved DNA. Idaho State Police forensic scientist Tara Martinez analyzed latent fingerprints found on the plastic bag around JJ's body.
Evaluation of item 11 in the lab, the black plastic with the duct tape, yielded 2 latent prints. Correct? Yes. And both of those latent prints matched the known prints of whom? Alexander Lamar Cox.
That's Lori's older brother, who died in December 2019. A family friend who testified earlier in the trial said he saw Alex carrying JJ that September, one of the last times JJ was seen. ISP forensic biologist Catherine Dace also took the stand. She looked at hand tools from Chad Daybell's property, where law enforcement found the kids.
It was a variety of shovels, a pickaxe, a pair of shears, a post hole digger, and several hand saws.
Dace said she was looking for blood and possible human remains.
Did you find anything to be that you considered to be of evidentiary value?
Yes, I found several presumptive positive blood stains on the tools, and on several of the tools, I thought I found what could be charred flesh.
Dace said some of that blood was on the pickaxe.
Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from those samples?
I was.
Were you able to reach a conclusion?
The DNA profile from item 36.1.3 matched that obtained from the reference sample of Tylee Ryan.
At the end of the day, Samantha Gwilliam testified. She's the sister of Tammy Daybell, Chad's late wife.
Chad called me the morning that she passed away.
Do you recall what he told you?
He told me that she had been really sick and that she'd been coughing all night.
Did that make any sense to you?
No, because I had just seen her 2 weeks previous to that, and she hadn't been she wasn't that sick at all. She was very healthy.
A few months before Tammy's death, Gwilliam said she started noticing changes in her sister's marriage.
Something seemed off. They were very awkward at our house, and Chad wouldn't converse with my husband like they normally do. It just seemed really strange, and we weren't sure what was going on.
Gwilliam also said Tammy never told her about a possible affair. Her testimony lasted about 15 minutes.
Earlier today, the Federal Reserve took some of the blame for the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank last month, saying in a sweeping new report that essentially it didn't do enough when it came to supervising the bank's growing risks. And believe it or not, the report also partly blamed social media, writing that concerns about SVB were able to spread out online instantly and that technology made it easy for spooked investors to immediately withdraw their money. Now, joining us is NBC business and data reporter Brian Chung. So, Brian, what are the key takeaways from this report? These are things that we kind of knew when we saw it spreading on social media, but what else did we learn here?
Yeah, well, like any other big crisis, what usually happens afterwards is finger pointing. And in this case, the Federal Reserve's report saying, well, the fingers should be pointed at us. So we didn't do enough to make sure that we were aware of what was happening at this bank and then move fast enough to essentially do something about about it. Now, there are also some other fingers that are being pointed, namely at Silicon Valley Bank employees and staff itself. Well, really not the employees or staff, but the management, saying that they didn't handle the risks properly. So all of these things in tandem were behind what happened in early March when the second largest bank failure in U.S. history really proliferated. Now, for what it's worth, we're trying to really pull from the scraps here what we can do going forward to avoid this happening in the future during a time where just this week fears arose again for a third possible institution to go under, that being First Republic. So it's a very urgent time for the Federal Reserve to want to have this type of scrutiny, Gadi.
All right, so the Federal Reserve seems to be taking a little bit of the blame here. Does the report talk about how they could prevent something like this from happening in the future?
Yeah, well, it would be tightening the screws on the framework for policing the banks. Now, for what it's worth, the Federal Reserve also pointed the finger at regulatory changes that were made during the Trump administration that in part rolled back some of the post-crisis 2008 financial reforms known as Dodd-Frank. Now, the Federal Reserve said that wasn't necessarily entirely to blame for what happened at Silicon Valley Bank, but it certainly didn't help. So the Federal Reserve, as part of the laws that happened in 2018, they do have some ability and wiggle room to retighten the way that they police the banks, but a lot of that is going to require administrative rulemaking where they have to put it out for public comment, which could be a process, Gadi, that can take a long, long time.
The public comment, as long as it's not social media public comment happening instantly, right?
Yeah, it's a slow type. It's a slow type.
Yeah. Brian Chunk, thanks so much. And it is the last week of classes at Michigan State University where 3 students were gunned down in a campus shooting about 2 months ago. And during that shooting, a lot of students were trapped in classrooms with no locks. A new NBC News investigation reveals the issue is a lot more widespread than we might think. And NBC's Aaron Gilchrist has more.
Time and again, college campuses in this country have been rocked by gun violence. 2007 at Virginia Tech, 32 people shot to death.
Utter shock how anybody could do this to anybody else.
2013 at Santa Monica College, 3 people gunned down.
They have an active shooter in a library with an automatic weapon.
And most recently this year at Michigan State.
Run!
3 students murdered on campus. Professor Marco Diaz-Munoz spoke to NBC's Jesse Kirsch about trying to protect the students in his classroom.
The only thing I could think of was throw myself at that door, grab the knob, squat, and put my foot against the wall so that I could pull the door.
Diaz-Munoz was in one of MSU's more than 1,300 classrooms and had no way to lock the shooter out. It's an issue nationwide. NBC News found 6 other college shootings since Virginia Tech, where some classrooms had doors that did not lock, including Michigan State, the University of Arizona, UNC Charlotte, Santa Monica College, The Ohio State University, and UCLA. Each school confirming to NBC News students could not lock every classroom door from the inside during the shootings.
If I could have locked the door right away, it probably would have brought a little bit of comfort to the folks in the room and myself.
I spoke to Jason Schechter, who was a grad student at UCLA when shots rang out in a nearby building in 2016. He tweeted this photo of the locking system he cobbled together since he couldn't lock the computer lab he was inside.
First thing I did was I just looked for anything that I could use to secure the door, and the nearest thing I could find was some, printer cables and cords. Just anything to slow anybody down. I was trying to get in.
At UCLA and all of the other schools we examined, after their campus shootings, locking systems were either replaced, installed, or are being installed on classroom doors.
If we have no ability to control access at all, we have no security.
Paul Tim is a school security expert and says colleges have to put the days of open buildings and rooms behind them.
I don't know of any university facilities that are being designed without locks today. So what we've got mostly is retrofitting of facilities that didn't have them to begin with.
Just weeks after the shooting at Michigan State, the university decided it would install locking systems on classroom doors across the campus and tells NBC News it's starting that installation on May 8th. Tim says cost may be a reason that putting new locks on an old building has been more reactive than proactive around the country.
We're talking about hundreds of dollars at least, installation, all of those things. And it's not for a classroom door an expensive venture, but the multiplier is what makes it something that can be considered cost prohibitive.
Schools across the country now installing locks as a first line of defense against a possible attacker.
And back-to-back storms charging through the southern states are leaving a trail of destruction. Here's Hosford, Florida, on the Panhandle. That's where a tornado passed through yesterday, ripping roofs from homes and snapping trees. And tonight, 22 million people from Oklahoma to the Mexico border could see severe storms. Here is hail battering Kaleen, Texas today. 75-mile-an-hour wind gusts are possible, and tornadoes are a threat. Let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns with more. Bill, let's start with the severe weather tonight and tomorrow.
Yeah, we watched very strong storms in the last couple hours go through Dallas and the Austin area. You know, Dallas had about quarter-size hail. That's not usually big enough to shatter windshields or anything like that. Austin, you had wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour, so there's probably some minimized damage there. All of the little white dots on here are large hail reports. We did have one report of 3-inch hail, so that's like baseball-sized hail. So that's the largest I've seen today. We haven't had any reports of any tornadoes, so that's good. So we're not looking at any mass destruction. But these storms are still moving. Now they're through Austin, and eventually they'll head here towards Houston, Victoria later tonight, especially after a lot of people have headed off to bed. So the severe thunderstorm watches will be expiring in Dallas and Waco, but we're still going to watch these storms, as I mentioned, even heading south of San Antonio and towards Houston as we approach midnight. Then tomorrow we do this all over again. The storms are heading to Florida. We've done this 3 times with 3 separate storms this week. First Texas and then Florida. That's kind of been the timing. So 12 million people at risk. Again, tornado threat pretty low tomorrow, but we will see large hail again in Florida for this time of year, which is pretty rare, and damaging winds. And that includes the I-4 corridor and anywhere on I-10 here from Tallahassee over to Jacksonville, and a little section here of southern portions of Georgia too, Gadi.
Any other places in the country that might see rain this weekend?
A lot of places. It's almost like a better question of what areas won't. That's pretty much the Rockies and the West Coast. Everywhere in the East is looking at just kind of a nasty weekend. It's a good weekend to get some organizing done, water, the grass, hopefully put the grass seed down because there's going to be plenty of water. So here's the timeline. This is paused at 3 p.m. Saturday. Isolated storms, Chicago to Indianapolis. Then there's that line of strong storms, possible severe, heading into Florida and through the northern portions of the Florida Panhandle. Kind of a gloomy in the day on Saturday in New England. It's not going to pour, but it's going to be cloudy and raw. Temperatures only in the 40s and 50s. And then this storm on Sunday heads up the East Coast. And at the same time, this storm pinwheels. We're going to have snow in Wisconsin. It's going to be chilly and raw. Not fun for sitting out at baseball or softball games or track or anything outdoors for that matter. And then Sunday afternoon and evening, that heavy rain heads through New York City, Boston, up through New England, and it'll linger kind of into Monday. The rainfall totals will be hefty, but it's been a very dry spring in the Northeast, so the river levels are pretty low. So I'm not expecting any significant flooding out of this, maybe just some small stream and urban type flooding from D.C. northwards into New England. And as you know, Gadi, all our friends on the West Coast at the same time, it's sunscreen and sunshine and near record highs.
There we go. NBC, Bill Cairns, thanks so much. And coming up, abortion bans fail in a pair of Republican-controlled states. A senator takes the first step towards regulating AI on the federal level. And the dark side of this technology is making it a lot easier for pornographic videos to be used and to use the faces of unconsenting women. The proliferation of deepfake porn. We're going to get into that right after the break. And here's some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. 2 major abortion bills have failed to pass in Nebraska and South Carolina. In Nebraska, a bill to ban most abortions after 6 weeks did not make it out of the state legislature, while in South Carolina, the Senate flat out rejected a bill that would put an end to abortions. Right now, around 22 weeks is the cutoff for abortions in both states. Here in Los Angeles this week, former UCLA gynecologist Dr. James Heap was sentenced to 11 years in prison for sexually abusing his patients while working at the school. This comes after the University of California system said it would pay nearly $700 million to settle a suit brought by hundreds of women. In Washington, Democratic Senator Michael Bennet has introduced a bill to create an AI task force, which would be the first step at federally regulating artificial intelligence. And we are getting our first look at never-before-seen photos from inside the White House during the 2011 raid that led to the death of Osama bin Laden. The images were obtained by the Washington Post through the Freedom of Information Act. And in Colorado, Governor Jared Polis signed 4 gun reform bills into law today. The bills come just months after that deadly Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs. The governor says the bill will, quote, improve public safety and reduce gun violence. And tonight in The Future of Everything, there is a disturbing new reality you should know about. It's called deepfake porn, and that's when the face of someone else is swapped onto a different body without their consent. It is a growing problem in the age of AI that is getting worse by the day.
I don't know. I just clicked a fucking link at 2 a.m. and the morals didn't catch up to me, and I'm sorry.
On January 30th, Twitch streamer Atrioc gave a tearful apology for watching female streamers in sexually explicit videos. The thing is, the female streamers weren't physically in those videos. Their likeness was. What he was watching is known as deepfake pornography, where someone's face is put on the body of an adult film star using AI. It's hyper-realistic and usually done without the consent of the person whose face is being swapped in. The number of uploads to one of the most prominent deepfake pornography websites has been steadily increasing since 2018, with last year seeing the highest number yet with over 13,000 uploads.
You simply replace a person from eyebrow to chin, cheek to cheek, with another face.
Hani Farid is a professor at UC Berkeley who specializes in digital forensics.
Manipulating and generating audio, images, and videos is not new. Hollywood studios have been doing it for decades. What is new here is that machine learning, or AI algorithms, are learning to do the hard work of what used to be in the hands of special effect masters.
Now, anyone with access to the internet can make a realistic deepfake video.
To synthesize a voice, you need 30 seconds. To synthesize a video, you need a handful of images, not thousands or tens of thousands of images.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real.
And suddenly, what used to be a threat vector for people who had a huge digital fingerprint has now become a threat vector for people who have a relatively small digital fingerprint.
That means while celebs are still the main target, everyone's at risk. A creator on one online chat platform offered to make a 5-minute deepfake of a, quote, personal girl, aka anyone with less than 2 million Instagram followers, for $65.
There were other people who literally in the comment section of my videos and in my chat were saying, I bet you just got caught making porn and now you're trying to backtrack and claim it's deepfake.
Sweet Anita's a Twitch streamer with about 2 million followers. She found out she'd been deepfaked after the Atrioc scandal.
I've definitely tried to get these videos taken down, and I have looked into legal representation. I'm not like some wealthy millionaire that can just fritter thousands every single month, and it is thousands a month that you'd have to pay to have someone look through the internet endlessly and take down anything like this.
Australia banned non-consensual deepfake porn in 2021, and in late 2022, the UK said they'd do the same. Here in the U.S., while most states have laws that ban non-consensual porn, only 4 have laws that specifically talk about deepfakes.
Even if we passed a law, and it is a good law, and it is enforceable, the United States is 350 million people, which is 5% of the world's population. What do you do with 95% of the people outside the U.S.? Nothing. So I'm all for the regulation. Let's send a clear message that we think the weaponization of this technology, primarily against women, is not okay, by all means. But I'm also realistic that the reality is that it's probably going to have a limited impact on people's ability to get justice. And even if we can find the people, once the content is out there, the damage is done. I'm not saying stop innovating, but I'm saying safety first, safety by design, as it's called. Because if you develop and deploy technology and put it out there and then try to backfill the guardrails, it never works.
Our thanks to Casey Wassman for that report. And want to get an idea of how quickly artificial intelligence is making its way into politics? Well, right after President Biden announced he was running for re-election, Republicans released an attack ad generated entirely by AI. And NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson has more on how this could reshape politics as we know it.
The Republican National Committee this week using computer-generated video to show apocalyptic what-if scenarios for President Biden to be reelected.
It feels like the train is coming off the tracks.
But AI in politics is hardly hypothetical. It's here. From fake pictures of Donald Trump getting arrested to a fake video of President Biden instituting a military draft.
The recommended way forward will be to invoke the Selective Service Act.
Artificial intelligence, with its easily accessed voice cloning and face swapping tools, adding a new dimension to the political universe.
What I worry about in particular is that 2024 will be a GPT election. It will be the first time that these technologies are available in the context of an election, in the context of hundreds of millions of dollars. trying to push into the persuasion space.
In some ways, AI helps political operatives, making it easier to fundraise or communicate with voters. NBC News has learned the Democratic National Committee, for example, has experimented with drafting campaign emails using AI, according to a source familiar, who says a staffer still edits before anything's sent widely. Eric Wilson's a Republican digital strategist.
We're really excited about the potential for artificial intelligence to help make campaigns more interactive and to really free up campaign staff to hire better uses of their time, just like any other tool would.
Still, there's a dangerous downside to AI, the risk of disinformation.
And allowing Republicans to vote.
Take this computer-generated Elizabeth Warren, suggesting Republicans shouldn't be allowed to cast ballots.
It is necessary to restrict Republican voting in the 2024 election.
The senator never said that, but AI can make it easier for anyone, not just experts, to create fake content. To show you how simple it can be, we tried prompting one AI site with something ludicrous.
Politician kicking puppies.
But some strategists worry about what could happen when the lines blur around what's real and what's not.
To the extent that AI allows people who are trying to deceive people, to the extent that they can do that with better content, will be problematic.
New technology and a new political frontier. Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Washington.
Politician kicking puppies. That is dark, Hallie Jackson. Before we go, a quick update on the American journalist who is being held in Russia on espionage charges. We're not done yet, so stay tuned. Now, April is Autism Awareness Month, and today we are looking at a program that has given kids a cool and empowering way to have their voices heard. NBC's Raheem Ellis has more.
It's another busy commute in New York City. But listen closely to this announcement.
Hello, passengers. If you see someone at risk of falling onto the tracks, please get help immediately.
That is fantastic. You memorized the whole thing.
Yeah.
6.5-year-old Morgan Calles is autistic. This month, Morgan, along with more than 100 kids and young people like him, recorded safety messages for transit systems.
Never place anything in or near the doors.
Now in its second year, the Autism Transit Project has gone from just being in New York to other big cities around the country.
Watch your belongings and have a good day.
The PSAs were made for Autism Awareness Month.
I love trains.
Jonathan Trichter has founded special needs schools in New York and Connecticut. He's behind the project.
It's done a lot for their confidence and also working themselves into civic life in a more meaningful way.
Who was that?
It's me. Morgan's reaction, priceless.
So excited hearing my voice.
Morgan's mother, Brenna, says this program helps to promote inclusion.
This project is really great to highlight, kids whose voices you might not get to hear.
What feeling do you have when you're riding the train?
I have an awesome feeling.
Now, so do the rest of us, hearing his voice.
Be safe and happy Autism Awareness Month.
Rahima Ellis, NBC News, New York.
Thank you, Rahima. It has been 1 month since Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was detained in Russia. He has been accused of spying for the U.S. government, but the U.S. government strongly denies those claims. And tonight, his friends and colleagues are speaking out. Harry Smith has their story.
Last week, Evan Gershkovich was presented to all the world like any other defendant in a Russian court, accused of spying. Sam Silverman and Jeremy Burke have known Evan since college.
Wild to see him in a glass box. Really challenging to see that, but at the same time, his body language was so strong. It was Evan.
I think if I know Evan, he's thinking about all of us at home and how hard it is for us, especially his mother, his sister, his father.
Gershkovich's reports from Russia in the Wall Street Journal did not coincide with Moscow's version of the war in Ukraine or the state of Russia's economy. Last fall, his pals pressed him. Was he in danger?
He had assured us that because of his American passport, that this wasn't going to happen and we had nothing to worry about.
He told us, he was like, look, I get It's intense reporting in Russia. I get tailed by FSB agents, but, it's not a problem.
Emma Tucker is the journal's editor-in-chief.
Why do you think he was arrested?
We just don't know. Who knows what's going on inside Vladimir Putin's mind? Have they got some goal in mind? We simply don't know.
Russia has an ugly history with reporters, truth seekers.
It's not a good place to operate in as a journalist.
Very dangerous.
Very dangerous environment for natives and also foreigners reporting there. Evan reported the truth. Clearly, he wrote stuff that they didn't want him to write.
But a spy, Evan?
He'd be a terrible spy. he would tell everyone how cool it is that he's a spy, and then everyone would know about it. He's the last person I would choose to be a spy.
The legal system, such as it is in Russia, moves glacially. For Sam and Jeremy, their purpose now is to keep Evan's story alive.
It's not about doing everything you can do today. It's about how do you create a process and a system to sustain your effort.
It's a marathon then, not a sprint. Harry Smith, NBC News, New York.
And that does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you Monday, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.